The program you're going to see is about the city you live in or live near, the great metropolitan community of St. Louis.
For 60 years, Channel 4 has been your eyes and ears. We watched with you as you grew and changed. We made you smile. We were there when you hurt and when you celebrated. And through it all, we never backed down. Tonight, we look back at how it all started and how we and you have changed. Channel 4, 60 years strong.
Tonight, we look back as we celebrate 60 years of St. Louis broadcast history. I'm Sharon Reed.
And I'm Steve Savard. Thanks for joining us as we celebrate Channel 4's 60th birthday. Think about it. When we went on the air in 1954, there was no interstate highway system, no jets at Lambert Airport. The Arch, still just a dream. There were no malls. The big shopping draws were Famous, Styx, and Vandervert's downtown.
Yes, things have changed a lot in 60 years, and through it all, Channel 4 has been right here to document those changes and keep you informed.
It's quite a story, and it all starts with radio.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news flash.
Is the end of the Second World War.
Less than a decade earlier, the world came to Americans by radio.
St. Louis had dozens of radio stations. One of them was KWK. Today, the station is best known for a promotional stunt shown in this famous film clip from the 50s.
Rock and roll has got to go. And go it does at KWK. We're all through playing rock and roll records.
Well, that no rock and roll plan didn't really work out. But station owners did have one idea that took hold. They started a television station.
That was 60 years ago this month. Claire Kellett takes us back to the days when Channel 4 began.
In 1950, St. Louis's population peaked at 880,000 people.
The city, by any standard, is not only big, but important.
It was the beginning of credit cards, Sputnik went up, school desegregation, and when Barbie made her way into every little girl's heart.
The average family income was $3,200 a year. A gallon of milk at Deerberg's cost 82 cents. Gas at the Sinclair gas station on Chippewa, 32 cents. And a stamp, just 3 cents. Also, the first microwave was introduced and cost the same as a new car, $1,300.
It was the golden age of television.
You're a great.
Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
I could have spent our honeymoon looking for a husband.
The top-rated show, I Love Lucy. By 1954, there were already 621,000 TV sets in St. Louis. In fact, people spent so much time watching TV that movie attendance dropped, and so did the number of radio listeners.
I ordered it by mail all the way from St. Louis.
Television revolutionized how people saw themselves and the world around them. It affected every aspect of American culture. What people wore, the music they listened to, what they ate, and how they got their news.
In the late 1940s, the FCC was flooded with TV applications. Everybody wanted a TV station. So much so, the government threw up its hands and put a freeze on new TV licenses for 4 years until they could sort things out. By 1954, the freeze was lifted, and the ownership of Channel 4 was granted to a consortium headed by Robert Convey, the owner of KWK Radio.
This is 1215 Cole Street, where KWK TV began. I'm Andre Hepkins, and here's a quick look at how we got our start. One of Channel 4's original employees was maintenance engineer Don Francis.
I got there a month before they went on the air in 1954. The engineers were all ham radio operators. There were no television engineering schools.
They were playing without a rule book. It was much like the development of radio. They had all this time and didn't know how to fill it.
People that came to work in the television business was exciting because that was a new thing, and and they were anxious to get in and do that.
On July 8th, 1954, St. Louis heard,
"Good evening. KWK TV is on the air."
And Channel 4 was born. A special half-hour inaugural program marked the occasion with Mayor Raymond Tucker and, just for good luck, a priest, a minister, and a rabbi.
Speeches were made about how great St. Louis was. Back in the day, it was actually. In the 50s, it was still a viable town. After the fact, the Globe Democrat reported that the program was well received.
For the first few days, the station concentrated on movies. By the end of the second week, it was incorporating CBS programming into its schedule.
KWK, when they went on the air, had 2 news broadcasts, each of which was about 10 minutes long, and they'd follow that up with a sports broadcast, which was 5 minutes long, and that was the extent of it.
KWK soon started to produce their own programming because they thought it would be a good way to promote their real moneymaker, radio. KWK's radio disc jockey, Tom Daly, hosted shows like Recall It and Win and Community Album. Other DJs making the jump to TV, Gil Newsom, Dave Allen, and Big Ed Wilson. It was all new, and KWK really started to gain momentum.
According to the New York Times, within 3 or 4 days of KWK signing on, the department stores in St. Louis saw a huge demand, and televisions were just flying out the door.
This is our newsroom today. Going back just a few decades to the 1950s and 1960s, it was quite different. The first news anchor was a former Globe Democrat employee, Ed Keith.
Ed Keith's job was to sit at a desk and read the news copy. And occasionally they would intersperse it with some film that they had of news that was going on around the world, and maybe something they'd done locally, but it was really not anything like the news we see today.
Equipment? Well, it was a far cry from what we have today.
We didn't have all the facilities that you have now. Our character generator was a chalkboard and a piece of chalk, or a little pegboard where you put the letters in.
The first scripts would often direct the camera to a shot of a flip card to illustrate something. And the atmosphere, it seemed to be a little more lax.
And the cameramen, they just kind of went around and got whatever shots they want. If the director liked one, he said, take camera 1, take camera 2.
Color television soon became the next best thing.
Select special programs were broadcast in color, and that became a social event. People would go to the house to watch the Rose Bowl parade and so on, to see it in color.
It was the beginning of news gathering, and it would change drastically in 60 years.
Well, in 2 more months, the St. Louis County Police Department.
In 1958, CBS already owned television stations in New York, LA, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Since they already owned the voice of St. Louis, KMOX radio, they decided they needed a TV station here too. CBS had planned to broadcast on Channel 11 in St. Louis, but at the last minute, the network purchased KWK-TV for $4 million. The network figured it was better to be on a lower number channel. Viewers would begin their search for programs on the low numbers and would dial up to the higher numbers like this. And remember, most of the channels delivered static. KWK Channel 4, now owned by CBS, became KMOX-TV, and CBS immediately invested in new local programs like The Morning Scene, Montage, Eye on St. Louis, and an afternoon kids show that baby boomers still talk about today. News 4's Kent Earhart takes a look back.
It was a show created to repurpose old Popeye cartoons.
7 bells, it's time for...
The captain was played by staff announcer Dave Allen, and Cookie was weatherman Jim Bolin.
Riding a horse and you get off the horse and somebody comes up and says, say, you're a terrible rider. You can say, on guard! Get that up there, pal.
They had a live audience that would come in, and they had good participation because it was a fun show. You know, Dave and Jim both were very likable people, and they would introduce the cartoons with some silly little skits that they wrote or made up as they went along.
Thoroughbred racehorse. Captain? Oh, let me see that. Captain, that's not a thoroughbred racehorse.
If ever there was a guy born for broadcasting, it was Jim Bolin.
Many years ago, the uses of electricity were limited.
Jim hosted many shows, including St. Louis Illustrated.
That men have changed, and they're changing.
Jim's last assignment on News 4 was co-anchor at noon with Robin Smith. Jim died after a short illness in 1994, and of all the roles he played at Channel 4, he'll always be best known as Cookie.
Thanks for the memories, Jim. Hey, here's a little tidbit for you. I've been with Channel 4 for over 17 years, but I made my debut on this television station back in the 1960s as a member of the studio audience on Cookie and the Captain.
I'm Russell Kinsall. By now we've established that Channel 4 looked a lot different, but so did the city of St. Louis. The arch wasn't standing there, although they were clearing the ground for it. And plans were being made for a new stadium, but not the one you might be thinking of. And the downtown area of St. Louis, like many other cities, began to struggle as people moved to the suburbs.
When so many people live so close together, no one can know them all. No one can know all the families that need help.
Channel 4 aired specials about the city, hoping it would help.
And we count on the city to make available the necessities of life.
But St. Louisans continued to leave the downtown core. President Eisenhower wanted a highway system that was connected throughout the country and allowed travelers to drive quickly and safely wherever they wanted to go. And the interstates here in St. Louis, well, they do that. But it also brought about something called suburbanization, which caused some problems, one of which is traffic.
Something will have to be done about the traffic in our metropolitan areas, or our automobiles are certainly going to choke our cities to death.
From Kirkwood downtown is 1 good hour, and some mornings it's even worse than that.
Plans for a mass transit system were soon proposed, and Channel 4 was there to document it.
This television program will be about the possibility of developing a rapid transit system for St. Louis, and it will take up such related questions as whether we can afford one, or whether we even need one in the first place.
That prediction of mass transit would become a reality, but it would take 25 years. I'm Russell Kinsall.
The summer of 1954, when Channel 4 first signed on, was one of the hottest in St. Louis history.
I'm Chief Meteorologist Steve Templeton. Sharon's right, it was extremely hot the summer we signed on. And in 1959, we had another weather event that Channel 4 was there to document. This event, a tornado, left horrible destruction in its path. Meteorologists had just started using technology and lessons learned from World War II to detect severe weather. They no longer had to rely on kites in the sky. So when a wispy shape showed up on the radar scope at the Weather Bureau, the forecasters considered issuing a tornado warning. But radar technology was in its infancy at that time, certainly not as reliable as radars today. The forecasters decided since tornadoes were not common in February, a tornado was unlikely. St. Louisans went to bed to rain and woke up to what would be the third most deadly tornado in St. Louis history. The sudden onset and the fact that it hit at 2 o'clock in the morning led to 21 deaths and 345 injuries. And we were there to catch the aftermath of this horrible storm. I'm Chief Meteorologist Steve Templeton.
Weather was not the only turbulent thing in St. Louis.
We were entering the 60s, a decade of political, historical, and cultural changes we'd never seen before. And Channel 4 viewers were there to witness it all.
We saw the dawn of a new political generation, and the dreams of that generation die in Dallas.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
We saw our young men at war halfway across the world like we never had before, thanks to television. And we saw that war divide Americans at home. In 1968, 2 more assassinations rocked the country, and people at long last demanding civil rights.
I'm Robin Smith. St. Louis in the 60s was actually more peaceful than most cities in the United States.
St. Louis was the first major city stop coming up from the Old South going north. And so African Americans who settled here have been settled longer than in any of the other cities, north or east or west. And so we became very much accustomed to living a certain style and status that we fell into and accepted and kept quiet about.
Just as Dr. Martin Luther King was marching in Washington, D.C., St. Louis launched its own protest against Jefferson Bank. The bank and other businesses in St. Louis would not hire African Americans citywide. The peaceful protest started outside, but after a few hours, it moved inside. Protest organizers were arrested, and the protest became a cause.
The result? The banking industry and other companies started hiring African Americans.